Hey, what's going on YouTube and the Gospel Gambit School Community? My name's Kevin, aka Gospel Gambit, and welcome back to part 2 of our opening series on the Scorpion Horus Gambit. Remember, this is a gambit that is played by white versus the Caro-Kann. We are choosing this opening because black only sees this in 0.2% of all games that they play the Caro-Kann in. We did the math in the first video of 142 million games. Less than 400,000 games actually end up in this version by move 4. In today's video, we're going to be going over a few of the different accepted lines. The accepted is going to be when black decides to take the pawn on e4. And the main line is when they continue on and take the pawn on d3. Without further ado, let's dive right into these two different accepted variations. As you can see, this is the Lichess study that I've built for the opening guide. The chapters 2 and 3 are what we're going to go over today in this second video. The chapter 2 goes over the main line accepted. So after e4, c6, headed into the Caro-Kann. Remember, knight to c3, d4, d3. This is our standard position that we're going to get after the first 3 moves by us, and then black has a few different options. In all the accepted variations today, black is going to take the pawn on e4. In our video on part 3, we will go over chapters 4, 5, and 6, which are going to be all decline variations, meaning that black decides not to take the pawn on e4. All right, so for today, black decides to take the pawn on e4, and our move, bishop to g5, which when we pull up the opening explorer, is only seen 1,300 times in games on Lichess. Now from here, I consider this the gambit has been accepted. Right now, we're just down a pawn, and we've given black the opportunity to take a second pawn. We will recover one of those pawns. And in this first chapter, we do go over when black takes the pawn on d3, which is what we're hoping for. It creates for a much sharper game, and that's kind of the reason why we're playing this opening to begin with. So after g5, black continues munching our pawns and takes on d3, giving us the opportunity to develop our light squared bishop to d3, getting it on a nice diagonal down against the h7 pawn, and opening up both of the d files and e files now after the first 5 moves. So if we take stock of where we're at right now after 5 moves in this opening, we have 1, 2, 3 pieces developed by this stage, and we've opened up 2 of the middle files. We have 1 fully open file and 1 half open file. Black right now has all of their pieces still on the back rank and has a very dangerous D file opened up on them, which our rook is going to occupy here shortly. So from here, black has a few different options. Obviously, they can't push e6 right away. I would say in most of your games, almost 50% of your games that you play this, you're going to see black develop their bishop out to f6. So that's what I have here, at least in the main version. Bishop to f6, or knight to f6, and we are going to continue our development with queen to e2. It's important that we develop our queen to e2 and not to d2, because we want to keep this d file open for our rook that we are going to be castling queenside to develop. So after queen to e2, I've seen a few different responses by black. The most played move is e6. You could also see bishop to g4. First, let's go over bishop to g4. In a few of the variations today, we're going to see black developing their bishop out. I found that this kind of plays right into our hand of what we're trying to do with this opening. It allows for an early f3. Remember, we are not castling to the king side, but castling to the queen side. So these pawns on the king side are eventually going to be going down the board and attacking black's king. So the further we can get them down the board and with more tempo against black's pieces, all the better. If black tries to reroute to, let's say, h5, well, we can either continue our development and castle long, or let's say we can play g4, and after bishop to g6, now we can castle. If black decides to take our bishop here, we can just simply take back with our rook, putting pressure on black's queen, and we've already gotten a couple pawns down the board, storming against black's king when he eventually gets to the king side. We will go over another in the knight f6 variations of, I played a game where black brought their bishop out early and was able to get a nice pawn storm down the board. Okay, so you might see bishop g4 as the second most played move. You could easily see a knight out to d7, in which case just castle and keep your development going on. Remember, this light square bishop is going to be poorly placed until black moves this knight. We're going to put all of our pieces out onto the board, and black's still 1, 2, at least 3 moves away from castling themselves. So it's going to give us plenty of time here to continue our plan of attack and to keep developing our pieces. So those are the top 3 moves. I would say any of these other ones down here are so small, you can take a dive into them yourself if you kind of want to see black's continuations from this point on. You will have access to the Lichess study. It's in the Skool Games classroom under the Horus Gambit, and in there just look for the tab Lichess study. You'll have access to it right away once you click on the link. Alright, so after queen e2, you will more than likely see e6, and we castle queenside. Now at this point, I would say we are fairly set up. This is our quote-unquote perfect setup here as white. Black has a few different problems that they have to figure out before they can get castled and get their king to safety, as well as make sure that their queen is safe along the way. As you can see by the arrows, our rook on the d file is pointing against black's queen. Our queen on the e file is pinning this e pawn to black's king. So anytime we can jump or use these squares, we might have some nice tactics. Our bishop on g5 is pinning black's knight to their queen. Our bishop on d3 is pointed right at black's h7 pawn. And if you watched the first video, you would have seen the classic tactic where if black is not careful, well, we get to take on h7 and win black's queen. So just from seeing that, you kind of see that black's going to have to waste tempo, either moving their queen off of the d file or blocking their queen with a piece, putting their piece into another pin. Remember, just because they, let's say, move their knight out and get castled, and let's say they go here, they get castled, I'll make a random move. This knight is still pinned as long as our bishop is pointed at h7 with a rook behind it. This knight cannot move, or their bishop, if their bishop was there, cannot move. So it just makes for a very awkward development from black, and that's what we're trying to take advantage of. Alrighty, so once we get all of our pieces here, our next natural developing moves is going to be knight to f3. We want to support our bishop here, as well as keep an eye on this e5 square for diving in to attack either f7 or pieces that are behind black's 6th rank here. Alright, so we're going to play knight to f3, and then we're going to start launching our h and g pawns down the board. I would say that's a fairly good game plan here. At this point, we're going to try to pawn storm black. You could easily see, like, let's say bishop out to e7, knight f3, and then in some games you're going to have them move their queen to c7. If they do that, we can go for some nice little tactics here. We can bring our knight out to e4, And after knight takes, queen takes, now we're really staring at that h7 pawn. Black could take our bishop, knight can take, and you might get a position like this. Of course, the engine thinks that it's equal, but black is under some serious pressure. I mean, the engine wants you to go knight to h7, and then even some tactics along here with jumping back out to f6 with checks and all sorts of things. So you might easily get this position by trading off two of these pieces and putting black's king in pretty much a bind here. I mean, none of these pawns are really supported. Black is a long way away from developing this light square bishop to anything important. This knight is going to have awkward development. It can't even go into c7, and this rook is far away from playing the game. I think white is going to have a way easier time of developing a game plan. We still have our ideas of launching these pawns. I mean, f4 now is supported by the queen, so we can get f4 in, g4, h4, and really put a ton of pressure on black before they can either get castled. I wouldn't be surprised if black tries to maybe go bishop to, let's say, d7, knight a6, and then tries to castle queenside themselves. So really just try to keep the pressure on black and keep ratcheting up the screws. I personally have found that in a lot of my games that this rook usually is supposed to be on h1. In maybe one or two games, the rook can come over to e1, or if pieces start getting traded down, maybe it has to replace a rook here on the d file. But, I mean, a lot of games are going to start off with us launching either h4 or g4 first, then h4. And this rook is just really well situated behind the h-pawn as it runs up the board. And it also allows for tactics, the classic fishing pole maneuver, where we can leave our bishop here and possibly slide our queen in here for an easy checkmate along the h-file. So kind of play around with, I would say, this position right here is going to be your main development position. Once you get to things looking like this, kind of take a think, see how black responds in these next couple moves, and develop your game plan from there. Right now, we are down a pawn, so we do not want to trade too many pieces if possible, but look for those tactical opportunities. The whole point is to set up the board where if black makes one misstep, that we can strike and pounce on their position. Remember, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces developed to black's 1, with a 6th piece coming along the way. And like I said before, this rook on h1 is already kind of considered developed because it's going to be playing along the h-file. All right, so diving into the third chapter here, we will run through the first 3 moves again. Black takes on e4 and bishop to g5. So kind of the similar setup, the same setup as chapter 2. But in this position, black chooses to play knight f6. Looking at the database, the top move is e takes d. The most popular move, I should say, is e takes d, and you're going to see that in 65% of your games. So almost 6.5 out of 10 of your games are going to go down some of those lines that we just looked at in chapter 2. But in the next 13%, so let's say the next 15% of your games, black is going to continue with knight to f6. Just a quick note that if black plays h6 at any point, that we just want to drop our bishop back to either e3, just drop it along the file. So we are totally okay if they play this. I personally like f4, trying to bait them out to play g5 and giving us, obviously that's not a good move by black. So f4 is usually a safe square. It kind of stays outside of this pawn chain that's already developing. It doesn't block any of our files as they open up here for our other major pieces. So just keep that in mind. Oh, and a quick tactic, I should say, in this position, sorry, back to chapter 2. If black ever plays f6, quick tactic to win the game, queen to h5, and after g6, we sack our bishop. Black takes. We actually take the pawn here. It's actually better to take the pawn. Black's king goes on a little journey, and after castling, we win black's queen. And after they take our rook back, funny enough, the engine says that you can leave the bishop here if you want and play knight to f3, giving up the bishop, kind of allowing our knight and our rook to get into the game. If you don't feel comfortable with that, then again, just bring your bishop back to f4, knight f3, and bring your rook into the game. So that's a quick one. So f6 we love to see, and of course black castling without blocking their queen. All right, back to chapter 3. All right, so from here, knight f6. Now you have a few different options. The computer's top 2 moves is pawn takes or knight takes. I have personally found more success with pawn takes, e4. We continue with material equality right here. We give black the opportunity to exchange queens, which they do, I would say, apparently according to Lichess database, only 50% of the time. If you see any of this bishop to g4 stuff, again, just take black's queen. They're going to take back and play f3. If they decide to go this way, chase their bishop all the way back and castle along yourself, black's going to have a really tough game. Now, black is more than likely going to take, leading to the kind of main line of this variation. We are just going to take with our rook. We're going to keep our castling rights for the moment and bring our rook over to the open d file. And from here, black has a few different principled options. I would say the most difficult to play against, and it's pretty much an even position, is some sort of combination of knight to d7 followed by e5. Just gives black a solid position. Like I said, we're materially equal from white and black, and we're just going to have to work on creating a middle game idea without queens on the board. So some ideas: bring our bishop out. You can bring your knight out either to e2 or f3, get castled, and continue on with our game. If we ever see, again, black's bishop out to g4, they just love this attack on the rook for some reason, you're going to win a lot of games just from starting this pawn storm down the board. Now, after bishop g4, I have a little note in here. Following one of my games, which unfortunately I lost, but it was just due to a blunder later on in the game. Black, if they ever try to keep this pin, push him back, and then in this position, one thing just to memorize before pushing h4 and trying to get at black's bishop is to drop our bishop back to e3. This, if you just go with the immediate h4, black has this option to play h5, and after takes, black can take, and it's just not as good of a position. So just bishop h3, and now if they push h5, we moved our bishop out of the way. The whole idea is that we bring our bishop back so that we can play g5, and we tickle black's knight here on the f6 square. Those notes are right in the Lichess study, so if you ever forget or just don't feel like watching the video again, just save the link. If you don't know how to save the link on Lichess, come on to the bottom here and click the little heart, and it will save it right into your profile on the Lichess, your Lichess account. All right, so like I said, the most testing line here is going to be like bishop to b7. We're going to bring our bishop out to defend e4, e5, And I found flicking in this A3 move allows us to keep our bishop or our knight here on the board. This E4 square can fall under a little bit of pressure if black's able to double up our pawns here on the C file. And since there's no queen to pin black's knight to, they can start putting a little bit of pressure and dive into squares like C5 and attack the E4 square. So just be aware of that. A3 is a nice move to have in there. Black could continue on with knight to C5 anyways. We want to continue our development, and your game might look a little something like this. It is a fairly even position. It's not the most fun position to play as white, but at this point, we're just going to try to slowly build up an advantage and outmaneuver our opponents. Remember, it's a queenless middle game here, so don't be afraid to push some pawns, get your king involved in the action, and look for some tactics with these knights. Each side's knights are going to be very important to how the middle game continues forward and going onward into the game. So just remember, if black develops here, take the pawn. If for whatever reason black does not continue with this kind of plan of knight to d7 and e5, e5 is kind of the really important move by black. If they allow us to keep this e5 option available for our pawn, let's say by playing like e6, we're going to be able to keep our development going. First of all, it blocks their light squared bishop in. And now we're always going to have this option to make black's knight here on f6 feel very uncomfortable. And in a few of my games, black has kind of blundered this positional mistake. I'm calling it a blunder, but as you can see, the eval, it's only point +5. So it's given us a slight advantage here, kind of going into the middle game. Positionally, if we can get in e5, now our knight has a very happy square to jump into on e4, giving us access to the d6 square, the f6 square, and all sorts of tactics that can flow out of the middle game from there. So like I said, toughest attempt by black, knight to b to d7 and e5. We are looking to pretty much push this e-pawn up to e5. Alright guys, that goes over the 2 accepted variations. If you'd like, you can take a dive into the study yourselves, kind of play around, draw some arrows, make some moves, see what the evaluation bar tells you as you continue throughout your games. Load them into your own studies, see where you went right, see where you went wrong. And if you have any questions, post your game to get reviewed over in our Skool community. That's Skool.com. Take a look for us, Gospel Gambit Chess. I appreciate it, guys. Keep an eye out for the 3rd video, which will be dropping tomorrow.